What's up guys, my name is Ace, and with the addition of the all-terrain boots with Season 3 Reloaded in Modern Warfare 3, it's given us a nice sneak peek at what modern COD would look like if we didn't have Tactical Sprint. Now I know Cold War is a relatively modern Call of Duty game that didn't have Tactical Sprint, but that was running on the older engine. With these all-terrain boots, this is the first time we're seeing it with the post-Modern Warfare 2019 engine, and it's really got me thinking, is Call of Duty better off without Tactical Sprint? So that's the topic I want to explore today, but before we do that, I do want to have a quick recap on the all-terrain boots, since it seems a lot of people missed the video where I already covered this. Essentially, with these boots, it eliminates your ability to use Tactical Sprint, so there's no more Tac Sprint for you, but it very noticeably increases your base sprint speed in order to compensate for that. And what this means is, while it is still slower than somebody that's actively in a Tactical Sprint, since it's unlimited, unlike Tactical Sprints, it still allows you to generally cover longer distances in the same amount of time, or at least roughly the same amount of time. You can see the side-by-side here. You can cover 50 meters in basically the same amount of time as somebody that's using Tactical Sprint, as long as they're not using the running sneakers or infantry vests to boost their Tactical Sprint duration. But essentially with these boots, you're sacrificing those crazy little bursts of speed for consistency over distance without ever having to worry about tactical sprint out times. So you're able to get your gun up faster on a more consistent basis while using these all-terrain boots. And I thought I'd add just a little bit of data here as well. Based on my testing with the FJX Horus, this may vary a little bit from gun to gun, but based on my testing here, your sprint speeds with the all-terrain boots are boosted by 10%. And that's a really nice boost. When we're talking movement speeds, 10% is quite a big difference. Whereas with Tactical Sprint with this gun, you move about 19% faster than your regular sprint. But again, that's just for short periods of time, and over a longer distance, it balances out nicely with the all-terrain boots. And that's pretty much it for the recap of what these boots do. Now let's explore the topic, would this be good for the Call of Duty franchise to just get rid of Tac Sprint and then essentially have these all-terrain boots built in for everyone? So you are increasing that base sprint speed in order to compensate for the loss of Tactical Sprint. Now, a few things to keep in mind with this. First off, I'm mainly focusing on regular multiplayer Call of Duty. Warzone may be a bit of a different story, but honestly, as long as you're able to cover longer distances in roughly the same amount of time, I think a lot of the points I bring up today would also transfer to Warzone. Also, I realize this may be a bit of a hot topic for some people, because you have people on every part of the spectrum here when it comes to what they want out of Call of Duty. Some people that classify themselves as quote-unquote movement gods. Obviously, they want as much crazy fast movement as possible, even if it's just little bursts of movement, whereas people on the opposite end of the spectrum want things to be significantly slower. For me, I tend to fall somewhere around the middle, but with a bit of a lean toward movement. I still think movement should be a part of the skill gap. There should be some level of mastery to having good movement in Call of Duty. I just don't think it should be everything, and I don't think it should go all the way to the extremes. Also, I just want to get ahead of some comments that I know are going to pop up, and this is basically, you're just complaining because you can't keep up. And I keep up just fine. I get far more kills utilizing good movement against other players than deaths from people that are utilizing good movement against me. I really don't have that big of an issue with Tac Sprint. At the end of the day, I'm happy either way. This is more so just a discussion about what I think could be potentially optimal for the Call of Duty franchise and for the player base as a whole, rather than just advocating for what I want because it allows me to perform better. I mean, if that were the case, I'd probably be here advocating for advanced movement to return, because I personally love advanced movement, but I don't think that is good for the Call of Duty franchise as a whole. And with that covered, let's dive into this. What would be the result if we did eliminate Tac Sprint in Modern Warfare 3, for instance, and we just built in these all-terrain boots for everyone? Well, with the elimination of those crazy bursts of speed with Tac Sprint, I think the skill gap would be dominated at least slightly less by those movement gods and people that are slide canceling all over the place. But it definitely wouldn't eliminate movement in fights, and it wouldn't eliminate movement as part of the skill gap. I mean, when you look at side-by-sides here of somebody slide canceling around the corner in order to challenge, it's really not that big of a difference here. And with the all-terrain boots, you can still really utilize movement to your advantage. So I don't think it would really have a huge negative impact on the general movement skill gap. So as long as you still have techniques like slide canceling in play, which I would still want slide canceling to be in play, then I don't think it would significantly harm the movement gods out there, and they would still have a very clear advantage over the people that haven't mastered movement. Additionally, without Tactical Sprint, you would also not have any tactical sprint out times. So on average, you're actually getting your gun up a little bit faster without Tactical Sprint in the game. And just a reminder, we're still getting from point A to point B, if we're talking longer distances, in the same amount of time, or roughly the same amount of time, because of that compensated sprint speed. So while you may not be able to cover a really short distance quite as fast, you don't have that crazy little burst of speed, the general big picture pacing of a match shouldn't be harmed a whole lot if you remove Tactical Sprint, as long as you're compensating to the base sprint speed. And when it comes to some of the positives, this could help bring some balance back to appeal to a wider range of players, as long as it's handled right. I think things in recent years have gotten a little bit crazy when it comes to this, to the point where the average player out there gets kind of turned off by this because they simply can't keep up with these crazy bursts of movement. And I think in many situations, average to below average players feel completely helpless against people that are zipping across their screen faster than they can turn their aim. So I think this is the type of thing that would make the game a little easier to pick up. There'd be less complexity there for players to learn, but there would still be plenty of skill gap in that movement for players to master that. And the downsides, based on what I'm seeing here, would be negligible for the players that really like a lot of movement. And that's not even mentioning another benefit here that a lot of controller players would notice. This would actually save a lot of controllers. Tactical Sprint can be very hard on controllers in this game unless you're using the auto Tac Sprint setting, because you have to constantly mash that sprint button. Whereas with regular sprint, you don't have to mash it as crazy. Like we saw back in the day with older Call of Duty games, you just press sprint once and you're in a sprint now. As for an additional benefit, I honestly think this would slightly improve certain skill gaps, because we would see a return to more consistency when it comes to routes and timings on maps. Now, this is more of a higher level thing when you start developing that big picture awareness, understanding your opening routes and how quickly players with different guns are able to get to various pieces of cover relative to you getting to that opposite piece of cover to challenge them. But even in respawn game modes, if you're predicting spawns effectively, you should also have those timings in mind for if the enemy spawned there, they're going to be able to get to this piece of cover in this amount of time. And with one sprint value rather than multiple sprint values, it makes those reads a lot more consistent, and therefore I think it actually slightly improves the skill gap in this area. And for those that would be worried about this reducing the gameplay pace, while I agree that pacing within certain fights may change a little bit with the loss of those quick bursts, so for the people that are trying to slide circles around enemy players, sure, you're not going to be quite as effective doing that, although based on my experience, you can still do that reasonably effectively with the all-terrain boots. Like I said, I think the general pacing of a match would be roughly the same as long as you're able to cover those longer distances in roughly the same amount of time. I've noticed a really common misconception is that movement speed is basically everything when it comes to the pacing of a game, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Movement is obviously an important element, but there are many other elements that come into play, like map design, spawn design. That's a huge one. That really comes into play when it comes to the pacing, sprint out times, time to kill, various movement techniques that you have available to you, like slide canceling or jump shotting. I mean, look at Modern Warfare 2, for instance. They had pretty fast movement speeds, but there was no slide cancel, and jump shotting was kind of your only solid technique for challenging people aggressively around corners, and the pace of that game was quite slow because of those limited techniques that we had. So when it comes to that general pacing, yes, movement is important, but it's just one of many factors that determine the pace of the game. And I think getting rid of Tac Sprint and increasing base sprint speeds wouldn't really have a significant impact on the general pacing. And that's actually been my experience so far using these all-terrain boots. I don't really feel as though the pacing of the game has slowed down significantly for me. I still feel like I'm playing the exact same game, I'm just moving at a more consistent rate as I'm getting from point A to point B. So when I put all of this together and I look at the pros and cons of having Tactical Sprint, at least in my perspective, the pros of not having Tac Sprints would outweigh the cons, and I honestly do think the game would be slightly better off if we just return to a more simple and traditional version where you're either sprinting or you're not sprinting. You've got one sprint value, one sprint out time to work with. Still keep it unlimited though. I don't want to go all the way back to the days where we had to use like marathon and stuff just so we could sprint longer distances. And then of course, still ensure that we're able to get across the map in roughly the same amount of time as we would be able to with Tac Sprint, just like we see with the all-terrain boots. Now again, I'm not claiming here that Tac Sprint is like a major issue and a total deal breaker or anything. I'm fine with Tactical Sprint, it's not a big deal. It's just when I look at these pros and cons, it has me leaning slightly more toward returning back to a more traditional system with one sprint value. Now of course, these are all just my opinions, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How would you feel about Call of Duty in the future returning to a more traditional system without Tactical Sprint in the equation? Do you think this would potentially be beneficial for the Call of Duty franchise, or not so much? Do you think now that we have Tac Sprint, we just can't go back, and this is what they should be sticking to going forward? Also, just a quick note here, based on a bunch of data mines that we've seen so far for the next Call of Duty game, likely Black Ops 6, It does appear we will be seeing Tactical Sprint return. There were several references to like perks and things that have an impact on Tactical Sprint. So I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon with the Call of Duty franchise, but still an interesting topic that I wanted to discuss today. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.